And so I ask you, is a sovereign Europe not actually a sovereignist and in fact imperialist Europe that dominates everybody else? So why would we prefer that to a US-led or a China-led world if we're in Mexico City or New York? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes. Now, okay, so let's start with the title Sovereign Europe, right? Which is not mine. But it's important, though, because there is an element of truth in this sovereign Europe. Meaning, I do believe, and I say all the time, as Sheri says, of course, that a federal Europe is not the same thing as an homogeneous integrated Europe. So yes, it's a group of federations in which you recognize there are different peoples, and for this reason, you want to understand how to make these people make a decision together. Some important decisions, in particular on security, and today we need to have. There is no way out. Otherwise, we have many securities, small one at the national level. But this is it's not at least what is I think is. For the future, something really regular, the kind of visions. So federations, I don't understand why the idea of federation is considered to be an homogeneous construction of one nation. No, or one sovereignty. No, it's not. Federation has been, for this reason I use the tradition of Montesquieu, or the tradition even coming from the ancient republic. It's a kind of expansion without a one central with the people. So it's a construction, so England, if you want, Great Britain, it's a construction of institutions, it's a construction of regulations, yes, in order to create through time and through mores and traditions something that is called the European Union. It takes time. It doesn't take a revolution to have with the people, we have our Bastille. That is not the case. And indeed, this is an important aspect to be seen. So federation is not the same as cooperation, and it's not the same as intergovernmental confederations, which is very nationalistic, locally based, of course, and it's not the same as a unilateral. So I think that if in federalism, or the idea of the federation, there is an important value in this case, that Europe unfortunately does not like very much. Because yes, they like regulations, yes, they like organization central. They have a parliament, a monocameral parliament, which is strange in a continent in which you have many different. No? They don't have assimilated the idea of federation. And this is, in this moment, is not convenient to them. So that is the vision that I have. But I think cooperation is not enough, because cooperation implies, one, you have the goal you want to cooperate with, and this goal needs to be analyzed every time, or reconfirmed every time, so it's a short vision. And second, because you need to have a complementarity of agencies in relation to cooperation, so it is not less bureaucratic. You need to have bureaucracy. Cooperative implies bureaucracy in a case. And second, it is fragmented, because each issue is a way of cooperating. So you get out of this social-based form of cooperations and to challenge the question of sovereignty. So what is sovereignty in a domain, in a world as we live in now, which is no longer a place in which territorial states like from the 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th century, 19th century developed, there is something challenging now. You know, I was I thought in this way. Let me tell you how I reached this idea. The idea is the territorial states were born out of the fragmentation of the empire, the Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire, or a huge cosmopolitan entity as the Catholic Church. And they were a way of reacting against this global phenomenon, right? And today, the global phenomenon is not made by godlike or by the state's kind of unitarian or even regulatory kind. It is made by a strong form of capitalism, global, in the attempt, or imperial in the attempt. It's more than a very imperial economical, financial, and military empire. And in relation to that, in relation to these strong entities which are beyond the territory of the nation states, how can you use even the concept of sovereignty? So I have in mind the end of the introduction to the philosophy of history by Hegel, in which he's kind of shocked, he's scared about thinking of what he thought, meaning that the future, asking himself, where is the West? Where is going from east to west? Where this West is going to stop? So the West is when you have a global, we call it global, we call it international civil economic society, with the shrinking of the nation states or the territorial states. So your sovereignty, political sovereignty is in the process of retreating, and the civil economic society is conquering the world. So for him, that was a new form of domination, because you don't have the states and the sovereign states with the laws and blah, blah, blah. So today, in relation to this international global entity that is financial, that is technological, that is capital, that is not political somehow, what is that you can do in order to protect what you, I think, a good that for me is a good, that is individual rights or liberty or condition for equality and dignity of life. I mean, we are in a society in which more and more we are less free and capable of governing our lives, and also many of us, they are in condition of institutions more and more. Even work, labor is being deorganized somehow, and each worker is today made in a position of income or become a competitor of other workers instead of being possible to unify them. So in this situation of these applications of collective social and political power, what is the place of sovereignty? Situations, Europe is interesting because without predicting or without even planning that, it proposes something after World War II that can be used now and developed now precisely in order to, I wouldn't say protect democracy or whatever, but certainly to make a claim that a democratic and liberal society needs to have the strength of a federal structure. At least at the level that is continental for Europe. It's not simply Trump for me. Trump is an epiphenomenon, is the highest moment, or you know, but there is something more than Trump here. Do you think that when Trump is no longer Trump or is no longer at the White House, everything is going to be no, I don't think so. There is a process that is truly in a change. Perhaps there will be somebody else, but something is changed in a way that. So we see this change in Europe very well, because the assault on the European Union, the assault on simply the regulation that you say that is bureaucratic, but still it's a form of protections. Okay? So for me, Europe is an interesting place in which to experiment. What a sovereign power can do today. I call it sovereign because it has the power of imposing obedience, regulations, and laws, and in different ways, perhaps through subsidiarity. Why not? Instead of having, you know, the verticalization, you can have a socialization, and even a federation at the social level. You don't need to have all these states organized and among themselves federated. There are different forms of federations. Recently, some intellectuals, among them Balibar, Katerina Pistor, Jonathan White, they publish a letter or a document, sign a document to the European leaders who are in the meeting yesterday and today, proposing precisely a new social federation of Europe. Social Europe. So I think it's interesting because it's a way of interpreting the plurality of people in societies and to make that a condition for self-governing local through the more federative Europe. So that was my idea. It's not a question of the demos one, and there is no demos one. Not even in the democratic demos there is the demos one, which is a fiction, a juridical fiction, as we know. So it is a pluralistic in any case entity capable of developing both through local and regional and continental. I think is an important experiment, or in any case a challenge, right? So that is my main idea. I don't know, perhaps, yeah.
Maybe I might use my role as chair to put the question this way. It was very interesting hearing your response to the two pointed provocations, because you didn't directly answer the question of what has actually happened to Europe or what Europe actually is, which was phrased in two different ways. And so I guess my question is, the underlying, maybe it's too grandiloquent, but there's a kind of philosophy of history at play here, which basically says that you are thinking about Europe at this moment. In your answer, you referred to it as a zone of experimentation or a place for experimentation. You referred to it rather academically as interesting. Europe's interesting as a place with which to experiment, and then you pointed us back to the World War II moment that was also evoked by Carlo as a sort of, well, there were some ideas there, but that's a very different register of answer from the two commentaries, which are insisting, Nadia, how does this vision, how does this manifesto relate to actually existing EU political economy or actually existing EU politics in this moment, where there is a substantial backlash against, and one that argues in terms which could actually turn your argument against itself. So I'm kind of curious about how you envision the function of a piece like this, given your, at one level, kind of quite firm, I was just trying to describe, quite firm refusal to actually engage with those questions.
Yeah, I do have a strong idea about that, it's true. Particularly when I reflect upon what today came from the press,
Yes.
right? So if I read the sum of the outcomes...
This is the Maloney-Merz.
Yeah, how they say Merz. So, first of all, but this is interesting, is a package omnibus of simplifications, and the simplification is to be achieved through why this is interesting. In this way, yeah. Okay, through informal active. For instance, if you want to open a business, a corporation, a startup, now you have to pass through regulations, okay? Which means that you have to wait. It's not a consent assent, you know. And they say no, you wait 24 hours, they put some limits on waiting, and then you're free. Second, if the regulation from Brussels is in some way considered to be by the local parliaments in disagreement with their own interest, they can say no to that. So it is a kind of taking back the authority to the states, to the sovereign states, and using the Europe in this case as a platform for attracting capitals, that is low taxes, deregulations for the activity of commercial of any kind, so that, in a sense, you redesign Europe. This is a new, they have a vision. They do have a strong vision of Europe, which is not federal, which is a big corporations model. They like giants, as they say. They like to be like. So it is a different Europe. And thus, if they have a vision, and they have a very strong vision, I cannot understand why those who are criticizing this Europe cannot dare to have an opposite vision capable of at least showing that they are putting in trouble, creating a lot of problems for our freedom, our stability, social stability, and these are, why not? So why not to have strong ideas in this moment of weakness?
Deal questions for a while before do we have comments, interventions? Vicky?
I haven't read the book yet.
I told you it's not around.
But I'm trying to place where you are. I don't, and I'm coming as a historian. I think I was fairly shaken up a couple of years ago reading Karen Patel's work on the European project and a lot of the work done on the Nazi-fascist New Order, which was so advanced and sophisticated in developing financial mechanisms and women's global organizations, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, to advance a European project against other Lebensraums, other Monroe doctrines, and so on and so forth. And this history, I think, is very enriching to understand that the so-called EU project, you could trace it in an ideal way to Montesquieu, to Mazzini, especially when coming out of Italy, but it follows the pace of other regions and global capitals. So I was wondering, what do you make of Wolfgang Streeck? I mean, the left critique, and it sounds like because my understanding of Streeck, who was so much involved in the critique of the neoliberalism of the 90s from a labor perspective, and somebody who was very deep in corporatist doctrine and corporate thinking about, that his argument is that the problem is the EU, as it's been merged, is not what was imagined as a able to buffer this against the neoliberal order. It's a pure expression of it. The technocratic says they're not even that good. There was some growth and so on and so forth. Not for Italy, but for Germany. Very bad growth, uneven growth is pointed out. So Streeck, his argument is saying you can't get it from them. I mean, that's part of a history that created WHO and, created all of these neoliberal bureaucracies, global bureaucracies. That's part of it. It's part of this neoliberal order. The EU is neoliberal order, so it doesn't have the leverage. You can't take it now and turn it into something else. You can't take US aid and turn it into social democracy. Okay, so the idea, as I understand it, is let's bring back, we got still energy, young people in Germany, very hard to see them, maybe some in the East, maybe some in Italy, and you gotta bring back politics. Okay, so it can't be done up there. That's the nature of sovereignty. It goes back to the so-called nation state, but it doesn't have to be nation state or conventional states, and that's where you're going to get politics. So I'm trying to understand, that you're arguing about sovereign. Where's the politics? Because that's the problem. So either way you go, both theoretically or historically, the last 40 years, or you go back to World War II, Europe. These imperial power of Europe. It's not in Europe, it's empires that are in charge. And so then, I don't understand sort of what this EU means to you if it's not still some idealist notion, which is broken now by these new histories. And show that, hey, these are laws and conditions, one made it, the other made it, and so on and so forth. And it's all kind of a pragmatic with every once in a while you get a Christian Democrat, Frenchman to throw some idealist. So if you take a Millward history of it, which I think is also what Patel does, you expect now, but it's a crisis. It's not caused by Trump. It's the basis of legitimacy is gone. Of the EU is gone. It doesn't grow in place, has no normative power. It's way too preposterous wars,
There is nothing to say
talks about genocide
Yeah, no, I
and so on.
understand,
So there's a
but,
lot to go, you can't just say, hey, let's bring back.
No, I'm not saying so, sorry, I'm not saying so, but if you determine that you already know the outcome, what we are talking about. So if you read this catastrophic vision of everything is predetermined, that practically there is nothing to say, right? Yes, of course, the politics is more complex than the sovereignty or the federation moment, and I don't talk only about that. This has to do with the self-federalization of society, movements, associations. This is what, the local activities or local government, and there are many levels. It's not only here, I simply talk about the anti-sovereignist move that I think is relevant. And I don't see, even this determination, this is capitalism, that this is Europe. Yes, okay, if you have this view, there is nothing to say, because it's pretty fun.
Can we get you to, what do you think of Streck's position?
Well, it's
Because I take him to be a left sovereigntist.
Yes, he's a left sovereigntist. I'm not a left sovereigntist to begin with, because I don't believe that from the nation states there is a vision connected to the social democratic classical.
Colin,
It seems to me Nadia has a good response. I think you're right that it's a very idealist position she has, but is it not also the case, and she makes a powerful response, that the return to the nation state as a sovereign entity is even more of a pipe dream than the creation of a sovereign Europe? That if any lesson we can get from Brexit is that you don't get sovereignty when you go back to the nation state, you get some weirder thing. So that seems to be your response. Your response about to Strick is sovereignism at the national level is even more idealistic than European sovereignty.
Yeah, it is, and it is also anachronistic somehow, because you cannot recover the power change at the national level anymore, unless you don't go through the terrible path of military fascism or whatever. But I don't think that it's our, I don't know, that, I think it's more,
I always understand Straight is in those terms. I understood him as,
a
working out new
internationalist,
new forms of relationship coming back out of
After all,
fight
Europe-
against the EU, and how do you leverage against the EU?
after all, Europe is a form of internationalism for our time. So there is no other way. So whether it's the local, the administrative local, the state local, which is completely shrinking down, there is no authority going on.
That's true.
So in some sense, it's a form of universal, internationalism that can open the door to something else.
Other questions?
Determine that you already know the outcome, what we are talking about. So if you read this catastrophic vision of everything is predetermined, that practically there is nothing to say, right? Yes, of course, the politics is more complex than the sovereignty or the federation moment, and I don't talk only about that. This has to do with the self-federalization of society, movements, associations. This is what, the local activities or local government, and there are many levels. It's not only here, I simply talk about the anti-sovereignist move that I think is relevant. And I don't see, even this determination, this is capitalism, that this is Europe. Yes, okay, if you have this view, there is nothing to say, because it's pretty fun.
Can we get you to, what do you think of Streck's position?
Well, it's
Because I take him to be a left sovereigntist.
Yes, he's a left sovereigntist. I'm not a left sovereigntist to begin with, because I don't believe that from the nation states there is a vision connected to the social democratic classical.
Colin,
It seems to me Nadia has a good response. I think you're right that it's a very idealist position she has, but is it not also the case, and she makes a powerful response, that the return to the nation state as a sovereign entity is even more of a pipe dream than the creation of a sovereign Europe? That if any lesson we can get from Brexit is that you don't get sovereignty when you go back to the nation state, you get some weirder thing. So that seems to be your response. Your response about to Strick is sovereignty at the national level is even more idealistic than European
Yeah,
sovereignty.
it is, and it is also anachronistic somehow, because you cannot recover the power change at the national level anymore, unless you don't go through the terrible path of military fascism or whatever. But I don't think that it's the power. I don't know. That I think it's more.
I always understand Straight is saying is in those terms. I understood him as we're working on new
internationalist.
new forms of relationship coming back out of
After all,
fighting against the EU. How do you leverage against the EU?
After all, Europe is a form of internationalism for our time. So there is no other way. So there is the local, the administrative local, the state local, which is completely shrinking down. There is no authority going on.
That's true.
So in some sense, it's a form of universal, internationalism that can open the door to something else.
Other questions?
I'm sorry, I'm talking too much.
Yes, please. Maybe you can introduce yourself.
My name is Jan Wouters. I just arrived in New York. I come from Belgium. I've been following European integration for many years. And 2 weeks ago, our university, KU Leuven, gave a honorary doctorate to Mario Draghi.
Yeah.
And he gave a quite memorable speech in which he called for a pragmatic federation. It was the first time for many years that I heard somebody of that stature use the F word. You maybe call those
federation.
Yes, that F word. But I mean, you may recall those who have been around already at the time of the negotiations of the Maastricht Treaty. We go back to 1990, 1991. That there was once upon a time the clause with la vocation fédérale, which of course never survived British scrutiny. But so we have always, at least in the last 30, 35 years, we have shied away from that word, but now it's back on the table. And it's that same Draghi that wrote that very big report about the lack of competitiveness, and that came up with a lot of, and that's the exact, that's the reason why you had those heads of state and industrialists coming together yesterday in Antwerp. And
They don't want federation at all.
No, they don't want that. But Draghi was there.
Yeah.
So I really wonder how you can reconcile those ideas.
They try. There are at least three ideas now. The strongest one, in my view, is the Merz and Meloni, because the French Macron is going to the end of his presidency, so has such a powerful proposal. This southern, like Pedro Sanchez, doesn't, although he's very strong in his country, doesn't have an audience in Europe, so it's the two. The Access Roma-Berlin again, I mean, I don't know, I don't like that at all. And they have a vision of Europe, which is hyper-industrialist, because business-based, and low regulation, blah, blah, we know that. And then there is the social federative Europe I mentioned to you, which is that all socialist, leftist of some kinds. And then there is another one, perhaps, but is still weak, or I don't know, perhaps it's not even there somehow. It's the one through more local, redefined, some countries redefine themselves in a more strict way, instead of having the 27 one. The 27 countries, to have 2-3 levels of Europe. There is also this thing.
Don't you think that the Draghi position is distinct from all of those?
Yeah.
I mean, I was quite struck by the way you invoked Draghi, whereas I read his report as the most unabashed advocacy of state capitalism at the European level that we've seen so far, by way of an argument that the US is state capitalist, so why should we hold back? He doesn't even invoke China, he just goes straight to the US and Silicon Valley, Pentagon, and simply says, well, if they can do it, why the hell can't we do it? But that, to me, is the strong French position. That's, forget Macron, he may be lame duck, but that's actually the French position. And crucially, what it does is to leverage, it brings back, and this is where I think the Meloni-Merz axis is actually weak, that.
I hope so.
Well, but I think the crucial issue is the old issue of fiscal politics.
Yeah.
Because to make the Draghi vision work, to make it work in the military-industrial complex, you need common borrowing on the scale of several hundred billion euro.
Yeah.
They've already worked their way through SAFE. German defence spending by 29 will be larger than SAFE was. And so, and Merz and Meloni are in radically different positions on that, right? Because the Italians are paralysed unless they can get Brussels
Money.
So I think there is still the possibility of a Draghiist French move, which leverages against the Germans and says, if you actually want to do any of this stuff, if you you are going to have to concede something. And I think Draghi is playing the long game on this. I think he saw Carlo's Europe, an anti-sovereign market. He lived the consequences as ECB boss. He realizes that that won't work, and he at the last minute is trying to turn this towards a supranational European state capitalist solution. And that requires this large-scale borrowing.
And he has two arguments very strong: the Eurobond, the derivatives, and the kind of uniformity in the taxations all around.
Taxation, capital market, it's that whole program. So I think that is another. That's another agenda item in the current moment.
And in my view, the so-called the socialist, the minority kind, they find themselves better within than.
Well, it's the law, right? I mean, it's
So that is.
Yes, James.
I had an observation and a question. An observation about neoliberalism, which is that American and European neoliberalism are really not the same thing. And I think, I mean, there's even been research done on this now that shows, profits are higher in the US, that's why you get this industrial consolidation and greater scope for expensive innovation, and the intellectual property regime favours that, whereas in the EU, you get consumer goods and consumer welfare and more choice and activities. Anyone who spent any time attempting to build a life in, say, Germany or trying to build a life here will experience the benefit of that kind of European consumer neoliberalism, which I think also has a popular constituency. I mean, people like local cheeses and food, and that is kind of what Europe is in the everyday, even for lots of people who don't necessarily want to credit it with that. So, this is a defense of European neoliberalism. The other thought related to that is, so what people talk about a lot is variable geometry and plurilateral cooperation, coalitions of the willing. The way you frame it, that's a set of fragmentations of the European project. But if the European project has to be experimental, is it not the case that it's exactly in those experiments outside the formal institutional frameworks of the EU that the kind of new federalism that you're proposing could take shape? If done by the right people for the right ends.
On the question of I totally agree with you. It's true because it's a very good point. It's proven. There are evidences, so it's clear. But I'm less, I'm skeptical about this making some market regulations because they are good for our health, are good for equal opportunities, are good for many good reasons. There are simply bureaucratic flattering of the market. So and also it is a way of interfering with the capitalism in one way that is perhaps very timid, but it produced some good until now. And it's not simply to have good food, no, it's also, for instance, the question of pharmaceutical is a very issue. The European Union, they can have for free very important medicines that otherwise it wouldn't be possible. They can use CERN, which is in Switzerland, to make an important open door to technology, high-tech European. They can. The question is that until they are, they bow on Trump and on his deregulation, this cannot be done. For this reason, to have a vision of Europe is not simply an idealism, it is a project. Because if you do A, then you can do B and C. And so you need to have that view. In my view, thus, it's not simply, the experimentation has the possibility of being experimented. It's not simply, it's not utopian. There are conditions for doing that. Already in research, for instance, very important research in technology, in even artificial intelligence, they can do that. And other, in the healthcare system, a lot, for instance, from medicine to experimentation in many other activities connected to life, from business, schooling. No, I think it's much more than simply banal regulations. There is a project, there is a vision.
The question, I took James's point to be also about this question of variable geometries, right? Which I guess was also implicit in Sheri's point,
Yes.
right? Which is, if the way in which you escape the realism challenge is to say, well, I'm proposing experimentalism and this is a field of experimentation, don't you then have to admit that the logic is going to be one of cooperation around specific projects, and as James is driving home, that implies a variable geometry, a multiplicity of different forms, which doesn't necessarily square with the federal logic, right?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Okay. So let's say in this way, even the conception of federalism, there are 3,500 kind of different forms of federalism.
Okay.
So different. So federalism is a very capacious idea because it can apply to social and to the political. It can apply to economic and it can. So you can have this elasticity. For this reason, if you have the forces, social, local, and also political, why not to have this view? There was the internationalism of the socialists in the 19th century, why not this one now? It's not a way of protecting our visions and our life. It's a banal logic, it's a pragmatist logic, there's nothing to do with utopia here. But at least to understand that why there is no way out, why there is no, you cannot buy that and there is no possibility of doing it. It's not true. At least until now, Europe had different possibilities, right? 80s, in the 80s, in the 80s there was, subsidiarity, all the leftists were against, and now instead subsidiarity becomes a relevant point. So you don't have necessarily a unified condition. In science, yes. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for the talk and for organizing this. I have two brief questions. The first one is, you talked about vision and you talked about Meloni having a very strong vision, and I think that's a part of her success. The fact that she has clarity on what she wants, and I think she's very good at communicating that as well. And it feels to me like on the left, and I'm talking from the perspective of somebody who's involved in Italian political life a little bit, there's very little clarity on what we want as a party or as a left-wing perspective. So my question is, who do you think should be the leader or the one speaking up with a new vision or even forming a new vision? Do you think there should be a bottom-up approach, a top-down approach coming from politicians or maybe academia? How do you see that process of building and communicating a strong vision happening? And then the second one is about what we talked about in terms of taxation and also army. So from my perspective as a comparative political scientist, I've learned that you need those two building blocks for state making. So tax system and army that we don't have. And it looks to me, we have some sort of it, but it looks to me like the monetary system was a way to say we're doing something together while we're not doing the most important things we should be doing. So how do you think that we should, or at least those that agree with this view, should approach the building of those two systems.
Just to drive it home, Carlo's, I thought, killer point was, why would you even want to add an army and a fiscal apparatus to this neoliberal monster? Like, why? That's where you went, right?
Building the pillars of a more unified system, political system, whether it's a federation or other sort of. I see that as condition sine qua non.
This is a discussion. I mean, the object of discussion in Europe now. You want to have a unitary defense, or you want to have simply what you have now, hoping that the Americans they stay there. That is the reason. Why we should hope that the Americans stay there in order to be safe. I cannot understand this because safety, the question of security is an issue. So either you recognize it is an issue but you can delegate others to do it, or you decided to do it. No? As to the Meloni vision, I cannot answer because for me she doesn't have any vision, but she's very opportunistic and she's very good in the politician.
I have a question.
I mean, one argument one might pursue is also that it is precisely this undecided structure that allows for both the national level and the European level to escape responsibility. That by creating a sort of more clearer structure in one way or in the other, it actually allows to open up a battleground, if you like, where you can have these political battles and what the actual shape of these political forms are supposed to be, either in a sort of more neoliberal way or more social democratic, more conservative, that it's precisely this technocratic, undecided, amorphous structure that makes politics in that sense impossible.
Yeah, that is the question. But you need to start somewhere. I mean, parties, movements, universities, then there are possibilities. You create a mentality, an approach to. I refuse to consider all this stuff already decided. You know, there is no way out. I cannot understand how really to think this way. So, for this reason, to go through history, through political theory, through arts and literature, to find ways in which you can read or approach the same problem with sincere trying to approach and so on. It's not bad because it's using theory in order to do theory, what they really want to do. So I think it's a real issue that you posed. But yeah.
And I guess your position is also a way out, because by creating a more sovereign structure, you have this clarity.
Exactly.
And it doesn't determine the direction of the politics, it determines that there is politics.
It is a creative moment, is one. Medical scrutiny, they demand nothing, not even legal. So this is a form of fascism, call it as you like, but it's not a question of calling something, but it has to do with the lack of a federal Europe responsible and accountable. Who are accountable? They are accountable to their local states or to their member states, particularly those who are in the borders. So it's, in my view, cannot be easily solved, of course, because immigration is an issue that is beyond the possibility of a state to be solved. That is not a solution. There's a question of using the rule of law and the principle of rights when we talk about asylum, when we talk about immigration, which is no longer the language there. There is no longer this language. The language is the security of the nation state, in this case Italy or Greece and so on and so forth. And Europe now, which never wanted to do that, is doing that. So it is embracing the local or the states, the member states policy, which is very likely one. So, yeah, I think you're right. This is the.
No, I was just a note apropos this what you just said. And in fact, apropos the latest reform in Spain, the amnesty for immigrants. But did you see actually the contrast between von der Leyen and Sanchez on that?
Right.
In which it came to this kind of liberal policy is being rejected or said, on the lines that, oh, this is actually against the rules that we have decided. Exactly. So the tension here is actually very visible, and I would go for Sanchez. Because if I think about the European Union in terms of immigration, I think about Frontex. Yeah, and I think about these policies that, when the right is in power, are terrible. Not that the left is doing much more, right? But let's say they're even worse, right? So there's tension here of this kind of issue. Absolutely. What do you?
I'll get a couple more and then let you respond. Yes.
I wanted to surface the question of Carlo, talking about the Brussels effect and this idea that the EU regulates itself, then the world would follow. It's very interesting. I wanted to ask, is it hinting towards a more like imperialist line? You addressed it in your book, and what would be your? Actually, don't understand. So, is it addressed in your book as well? I wanted to.
Whether the Brussels effect is a form of imperialism.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I want to touch on the question of Ukraine. Some people say Ukraine should join the EU and not NATO, specifically for the reason that the EU doesn't have an army or is in any way like a defensive group of states. And so, in this vision of yours of consolidating Europe, what role does Ukraine play in it? And yeah, is that something that you address in your book?
The defense, common defense?
Like, if you consolidate and build an army, will Ukraine join in that vision, or is that the end of Ukraine's participation in the EU?
If you want my opinion, because it's a question of opinion, right? I think Ukraine should be in Europe. Yeah. NATO, I don't know. But Europe, yes.
And in that vision, Europe has an army or has no army?
Yeah, Europe should have a conflict. Spinelli himself, who was the most federal, the most peaceful Kantian one, recognized that you cannot otherwise have either the presence of.
I think what he's asking though is, with the army, the implications of Ukraine joining Europe were very different for Russia.
Right. So the implication for Russia.
Yes, but then you're asking Russia to see Europe as a threat in a way that it might not.
They always see Europe as a threat.
I'm just explicating. I'm not justifying.
It's not an issue for me. It's not an issue.
All right. So
just micro on this issue, though Russia might see Europe slightly less as a threat if Europe weren't so thoroughly subordinated to the US, right? So the vision of a Europe with its own army is also implicitly a vision of a quite more independent Europe. One other just small question, it seems to me that one of the things you're asserting is that if on one hand the EU is used as an excuse often, right, for individual member states to depoliticize issues, to claim powerlessness. On the other hand, the relative lack of power of the EU is also a way for the EU to elide politics altogether in the name of its own powerlessness. And isn't that also one of the things this federalism responds to?
This is the problem, I think for this reason you need to have I call it federation because I don't have another name, but it's a form of sovereignty that needs to be conceived in order to solve a domestic problem, an international one. Otherwise, we leave it fine. You may say, why we should do something else? After all, as we live today in Europe, is fine. I don't think it is, because it is a problem of democracy eroding. It is a problem of social welfare state totally eroding everywhere, or almost. And that is the open door to new Nazi-fascist movements that are very strong. So if you want really to defend democracy or liberal democracy in Europe, you have to do something at the European level, not at the national level, which doesn't work. Because and in my view at least, not enough.
If it's a group of your questions, because there's many, so I was yes, and then yes, and then yes.
I just have a very quick question, which is you talked about the many kind of federal options that there are, and I was just wondering, do you have a particular constitution in mind that you would picture?
No, because it's not in my view.
Sorry?
It's not a new issue in my view. It is, Montesquieu is interesting because it gives you the scheme. You want to have division of power, you want to have but it doesn't tell you you have to have this movement, the other one, because it is a structure, an institutional structure that you can use.
No, I get that, but I'd just be interested. If you have a particular preference, right? Like because you said monocameral system, you know, are you replacing?
You need to have at least two.
The council with
Yes, that becomes
of the presidency. Yeah. Thank you.
Right? Mine is real simple. When did you start writing?
This before Trump. Trump too.
Don't you think that the pressure is easing in Europe in this sense of the right-wing authoritarian populist?
Is now.
Is now.
It's more.
It's more, you think?
Yes.
Okay.
Much more than it was before. Well, we have.
Do you think it's less?
Yes.
We have less authoritarian system in Europe now?
Yeah.
Oh. That, I really would like to talk to you because this opens my mind. Because if I come from a country in which practically they use police politics every 25 hours with a new decree, a new decree, a new decree. We have 6 decrees in 40 days. Can we go on in this way? Germany is becoming more conservative than it was. Poland, not to say. Hungary. Why do you think that he's not so?
Because Poland and Hungary is irrelevant.
Oh no.
Okay.
Well, Merz is a Christian Democrat. I really think that we're making a giant, I think it is a giant mistake to throw conservatives into the same pile as Donald Trump. That's empirically inaccurate and extraordinarily dangerous. I'm not suggesting you're doing that.
I didn't do that.
No, I'm just saying. I think we have look that Germany shifted from a center-left liberal coalition to a to now a giant messy grand coalition. It's really totally fine. I mean, like this is totally within the realm of sort of what democracy is about. I think
they have the authoritarian move that we have in my country, much more authoritarian.
Maybe, but it's certainly not what we have in the United States. So I think that we have to be very, very careful about not all of a sudden moving so far to the left that when conservatives come back to power, we're like, it's Trump. That's not. I'm not suggesting you're doing that. I'm not suggesting you're doing that.
I'm simply I think that the right, as she said before, the leftist doesn't have any project, anything.
Hey, I just wrote a book on that. I totally agree. I just think that we want to be very careful.
Anyway, go ahead. Creating a stronger democratic environment in a new world, which is different from the past 19th century, 20th century, could be a project for a democratic life.
But I'd be curious to know where, Sheri, you stand also on Vicky's question, which is, are you more on the strict side of democracies at the national level, or you're more on the Nadia side that
I think this is, I don't know, I'm going to defer to Nadia because she's thought more about this. I think this is, again, this is to me, as a comparativist, not a theorist, an empirical question. Historically, nation states have been where both welfare states and democracy have been situated. So history is on that side. The argument Nadia is making, and I think it's one worth considering, is that the challenges that nation states, particularly in Europe, face now are such that that model that has historically been the way things have worked is no longer sufficient to meet those challenges. I'm a comparativist. I think this is an empirical question to which I do not have an answer. I like the idea of Europe, but I think if what we're making an argument on is that it's necessary because challenges are such, as you put in your book, that even sovereigntists should recognize the need to move, if not to a super state, to a federation of some kind or another. I think that's something that needs to be debated, not asserted.
Yeah, debated, not asserted. At least in an interesting way. It's the path of narrative. Yeah.
All right, there were other questions.
Yeah, I have a question. Actually, I would like to know your opinion, Professor. I work at the UN as a journalist. I have been there for so long. I mean,
UN?
UN, yeah, United Nations. At the moment, there are a lot of problems there. But a few weeks ago, I would say 3 weeks ago, I was at an event organized by the European Union mission. I mean, EU has a mission, but I had a mission at the UN for a long time, and had been a lot of events, and usually were nice food, nice drinks, that's it. And then the ambassador, the EU ambassador will just say. Last time wasn't the case. He did a speech, it not only lasted for half an hour, but was a speech that I was with a lot of my colleagues. My colleagues were from Japan, were from Middle East, from whatever of the world. And they were asking me, because I'm European and Italian, what's going on? What's going on? And the reason is because the ambassador is a Greek, and his name is something like this, I can't remember the name at the moment, but gave a speech about basically that Europe was going to stand for the charter, the UN charter, international law, is going to be more assertive, is going to protect the law. It was a speech again that if he didn't have authorization in Brussels or whatever, he couldn't have done. And I tell you another thing, and then I want to know your opinion. I was recording like I was recording now, but I was stopped because apparently I didn't ask permission, so I will not be able maybe to report about this great event. But I was recording that, and then it's the press office that came, they all know me. And I said, Stefano, are you recording? And I said, yes, why? It was off the record. I don't know, I had to ask the ambassador, nobody is recording because usually I off the record. So I said, okay, ask. Well, he wrote me that evening and said, the ambassador is very pleased if you actually report. So I did a report where it was Miracolo and New York. The question, I had to, if I didn't say the story, there was no question. Do you think that was just a boutade by an ambassador that is a little bit, wants to be protagonist? Or do you think that really there is a change about foreign policy? Because again, I never heard something like this.
Doesn't have a foreign policy. Doesn't have a foreign policy. Europe is an attempt to stay in between big, imperial states, in between China, Russia, and doesn't have a unitary policy, international. I don't see. Certainly they make some assertions sometimes. They find a way of discussing in the world what they really think. But I don't think is there a minister?
Maybe it was a try to see at the UN if maybe it's the right.
Yeah, because they want to make perhaps an assertion against France or against the United States trying to debunk also the UN. I don't know. But is it? I don't know, doesn't happen. There is no European Union from the point of view of a ministry of foreign office. Does he have a foreign office? I don't think so. So the guy was very ambitious.
We have time for one last question, if it's brief, and then a reply.
I will keep it brief. I thank you for organizing this fascinating as always. I'm a simple student working. The important question, whatever. Most important question. So you make the case for European integration, big supporter here, But the real question is going to be how is that going to work with the national movement that we see throughout Europe? And I'm curious to hear your opinion about whether you believe that kind of sovereignty that you're talking about, this renewed notion that ultimately Europe is going to send the superstate whether or not that's going to be convincing enough for nationalist movements around Europe, and whether the necessity of what we're currently is actually going to authenticate such a process, and whether or not that's something new, whether or not there's going to be what Europe is going to look like in that case.
I don't know what the future will be, but if you are a nationalist or a sovereignist nationalist today, and you refuse to think in terms of cooperations or sovereignty, you are totally lost, because what are you going to defend, to protect, if you have the power practically zero in relation to big corporations, information or informatizations? I don't know what does it mean, the affirmation of national sovereignty at the level of a small nation states. So these medium, small nation states today are in a moment of difficulty, and we should recognize that, because there is no simply the sovereignty of the imperial United States. There are more sovereignty. In addition to their sovereignty, they have. We open.
On that note, we can please stand.